welcome to ThePrint's Softcover, our online venue where we launch non-fiction books. Today we have a very special guest. His name is Samrat Choudhury. He is a journalist and author from Shillong in Meghalaya. Samrat has written a lot of books on the Northeast India, and some of his very prominent ones include The Braided River, which is a travelogue following the course of the Brahmaputra. And he's also one of the two editors of an anthology titled Insider, Outsider, Belonging and Unbelonging in Northeast India. And his first novel called Urban Jungle was nominated for the Man Asian Literary Prize. And besides this, he has also authored several short stories, essays, and a graphic novella. And today we are going to talk about his latest book called The Northeast India, A Political History, which has been published by the HarperCollins. Let me unwrap the book for you. Okay, here is Samrat's latest book. It's published by HarperCollins. All right, so Samrat's new book chronicles the journeys by which each of the northeastern states entered modern India. So Samrat, a very welcome to ThePrint.
Thank you.
I think I'd like to rephrase the last line, if you don't mind, the chronicling bit.
Yeah.
Okay. So Samrat's new book chronicles the journeys. Can you hear me? Am I audible?
Yeah, I can hear you.
Okay. All right. Sorry. So Samrat's new book chronicles the journeys by which each of the northeastern states entered modern India. A very warm welcome to ThePrint, Samrat.
Thank you. Thanks, Martin.
Okay. So my first question, which is something which I found very striking, which you have written in the preface, that your effort has been to write a readable narrative account guided by the two eyes of history, geography, and chronology. So could you walk us through the process of how you kind of simplified the narrative, considering, Northeast India in itself as a very complex structure?
Yes. So basically, because the region is so diverse and so vast in its diversity, it would have been impossible to frame it in any other way, I think. If one were to try and find a single narrative thread to connect the whole story, it would have been very, very difficult. So I kept it simple. And the way I did it was I looked at each state separately and more or less each of the major communities in each state separately. And to do that, I just looked, as I mentioned in the preface, at the geography and the chronology. So I looked at the current map of Northeast India as it is, and then I tried to trace backwards how those areas became parts of India itself in the first place, because we must remember that a lot of borders, international borders, surround this region on all sides. And those borders, some of them are fairly recent. For example, the border with Bangladesh is from 1947.
Right.
And so the process of drawing those international borders, the first instance, and then the internal boundaries, because after all, Assam used to stretch across pretty much all of Northeast India at one time, and so the other states really came out from there. So I just looked at the processes geographically and chronologically by which the present map of Northeast India came into being.
Right. Okay. And did you kind of, encounter any hurdles while trying to simplify the narrative?
Well, it is difficult. It is difficult to figure out what to put out and what to keep in. I mean, that's always a difficult thing. One can research almost any part of it endlessly, but to do it in its entirety would not be one book of roughly 350 odd pages. It would have been several encyclopedia volumes. So each state can fill one very fat book by itself, at least. And so basically, it was a process of trying to make potted histories in a very readable, easy to understand, jargon-free way that put it all together and also traced the connections between each of these places and the wider world. Because we often tend to view things in isolation, but things are connected. And so what happened in Assam was related to what was happening in the politics of India as a whole before partition, and so on and so on. So I tried to highlight some of those connections as
well. Okay, all right. So, and coming to the book, there's this chapter. It's called "Tea, Christianity, and Modernity." It tells how the Ahom kingdom's decline in Assam and the birth of modern Northeast India begins with religion and cups of tea. So, as interesting as it sounds, I would also, if you can tell our readers, about this very rather unique association.
Well, so I'm looking at two major things which have shaped modern Assam. One is tea as an economic factor, because after all, it's, the production of tea was, in fact, in my understanding, also key to why it became a part of British India and how it was integrated into British India in the first instance, which I have mentioned in the book. Because the British did not immediately, the East India Company did not immediately annex all of Assam to its existing domains after the Anglo-Burmese War, which ended in 1826 with the Treaty of Yangabu. They did it in stages. And usually it tended to go with where tea was found, as far as Upper Assam is concerned.
Right, exactly.
And so there was an association even there between tea and the integration of these areas into the British Indian Empire. After all, the East India Company was a company. It was interested in profit.
Yes.
First and foremost. And so tea was a very major source of revenue. And before that, it was tea from China, which had filled their coffers.
Yes.
But that was going. It was going because of problems there. And so tea being found in Assam was very important to its integration into the modern, integration of Assam into the modern economy. And also to a lot of things that happened then. So when they started those plantations, then they had to bring in labor. So then the tea tribes, people were ferried into Assam from central, from Chotanagpur Plateau and central India. And transportation increased, right? The transport linkages increased. So it was very important for the integration of Assam into the modern globalized economy.
Yes.
And Christianity, which is the other thing that you've mentioned. So around the same time, just a few years later, the American Baptist missionaries showed up. And of course, their arrival was also epochal, because after all, it was the American Baptist missionaries who standardized the language and for print. And that, it has been a matter of lasting significance, because the standardization of languages for print is something which they did in many places. They did in many places. It only happens with the arrival of the printing press, and the first printing press comes with them.
Yes.
And that standardization of languages for print is fundamental to the formation of the linguistic identities that are associated.
Right.
So therefore, tea and Christianity in that sense were very foundational to the subsequent politics for a long time.
Okay, all right. Okay, and coming back to politics, and the questions of representation and identity have been very central to the region, especially Assam. And I'm from Assam, so I've grown up, hearing things, witnessing things, and experiencing. And so your book says, the politics of Assam has seen a sharp turn from separatism to Hindu nationalism with an Assamese twist. So if you can just, tell our audience, what do you mean by this Assamese twist here?
Well, it's basically the recent turn to the present ruling party. Because if we look at Assamese separatism, which is Alpha basically, I grew up in Shillong, and my father was posted in Guwahati during the 90s, so I used to be there quite often. So I still remember the sandbagged positions in the railway station and on roadsides, and the sense of a place at war. And of course, that was for separation from India. It was for a separate country. And it had a lot of popular support at that time.
Yes.
For several years.
Yes.
The boys were seen as heroes, the boys fighting for independence.
Yes, they were the boys.
They were the boys.
Yes.
And so from there to where it is now, where you have this chest-thumping Hindu nationalism, is quite a change. This flag waving all the time, and the flag being waved is, of course, the Indian flag. Wonderful, but it's quite a sharp turn. And so that is what I mean when I speak about the transition that we saw during the Alpha period, giving way to this chest-thumping Hindu nationalism.
Right.
It still has its local characteristics. So it does have certain Assamese characteristics. It's not like the Assamese identity has been completely gone. A lot of people who were involved with ASU, for example, which is, after all, representing the Assamese identity, are now ministers in the present BJP-led government.
Yes.
And so they have managed to accommodate themselves and accommodate their politics into the present Hindu nationalist politics.
Right. So there's the Assamese twist to that. Okay. All right. And to our viewers, so the book also talks about, when we go to Nagaland, the book talks about the Naga tribes and the languages. And there is something I found, very kind of enlightening and warming when the author says that people often mistake dialects, the languages to be dialects, which is not correct, which is something even, something I've encountered, growing up, when people say, oh, there's so many dialects, in Nagaland. Which is not the case. So, Samrat, would you like to kind of, talk a little bit about this?
Well, the distinction between language and dialect is always a tricky one. I don't remember who it was who said that a language is a dialect with an army. And that is often the case. But in the case of the Naga languages, I believe that they are mutually unintelligible. So there is quite a broad separation from one to the next. And of course, I don't speak those languages, so I have to rely on Naga writers who say that is indeed the case.
That's language, not a dialect. Yeah. Okay.
So I mean, we have, I believe, somewhere around 220 languages in Northeast India, but of course, there are problems of definition, and those definitions have been and continue perhaps in some cases to be debated.
Yes, exactly. Especially without, written records. So that's a major hurdle. So, going forward, you also talked about how neighboring Manipur has so many Naga tribes and, tribes such as the Kukis. And there are, of course, the Gorkhas and the Dominant Métis. And, with the ongoing conflict, there is this one line where you say that Manipur remains suspended in an uneasy peace and is prone to fraternal conflict. So do you think the ongoing situation in Manipur, the ethnic fault lines, are a result of some larger historical issues, like issues that have remained unresolved?
Well, yes, that's the simple answer. But my book was actually, I submitted my manuscript long before, right at the beginning of January, so long before any of this happened. And so it turned out that my sense that things were not all right was correct. But of course, I had not foreseen that things would get so bad. The reason that I ended my chapter on Manipur on that note, that cautionary note, as it were, about how it remains in a state of unstable equilibrium, which it was at that time.
What you call an uneasy peace.
Yeah. It is because the larger issues were unresolved even before May, when this trouble broke out. And those larger issues have now come back to the forefront. They have just been brushed under the carpet, but now the carpet is gone. And those larger issues, of course, relate to the various nationalisms. So, for example, the Naga issue remains unresolved. And now it's back. The Nagas are saying that what happened to our framework agreement? And what happened to the final settlement of our peace talks?
Right.
And that is one of the big issues there. And it is an issue which of course, includes a large part of the hills of Manipur. And that was unresolved, and it is still unresolved. The issues of identity. We must remember that a lot of communities in the Northeast have had insurgent armies, and most of those insurgent leaders have entered peace talks. But the Meitei insurgent leaders did not enter peace talks. Even the Nagas have had long-running peace talks, but the Meitei insurgents have still not entered the peace process.
Yeah.
So even that was unresolved before anything happened. And so Meitei nationalism was there, and it is very much there right now. It was unresolved then, and it is unresolved now.
Right.
For the Kukis also similarly, their demands for a separate administration are only in the news now.
Right.
But those demands go back a very long time.
Right. It's always been there, you're saying. Right.
Yeah.
Okay.
So those were unresolved then, they're unresolved now. And I could see that things are not all right across the border in Myanmar. And that's not much of a border. So things were going to spill over at some point.
Right. Okay. And so from there, you go on to Meghalaya. And, I found very, very interesting two things. First, I'll address the first, where you're saying if there's one place where people from around the region and the world come together for the birth of Northeast India, it is Shillong, the first modern city in the entire region. So why do you think that happened? Is it because of Shillong's proximity to Assam? Or is it...
It was the capital of undivided Assam. So just the fact that it was the capital of undivided Assam made it the capital of undivided Northeast India in a certain sense.
So in that sense.
Yeah. Okay. So everybody was there. Everybody was there, and because so many people and institutions were there, the first assembly in Northeast India was the Assam Assembly in Shillong.
Right.
And a lot of things just happened to start there.
Right. Also, you also talk about the weather,
which is what drew the British into the place. So when David Scott first got in there, the big attraction for him was, as it is recorded, that they explained it to the local leaders then, that they wanted a plot of land in the hills because they wanted to eat the cool air of the Khasi Hills. Yeah. And so it was the cool air of the Khasi Hills that attracted the British.
Right. Okay. And the second thing is, which is something I found, it's very interesting, where you're talking about Matrilineal in Meghalaya, and that the most important site associated with matrilineal culture of the ancient Khasis is the famous Kamakya temple in Assam. So can you please elaborate on this a little bit?
Yeah, it's a bit hard to elaborate, but basically there are associations and mentions that are found from Khasi historians as well as Garo historians.
Right.
And where they basically speak about this Kamakya, the word coming from Ka Meikha,
right,
which is the grandmother in the Khasi language.
Right.
And so basically there are legends that, or myths if you like, which sort of connect to that space as being a place where the Garos, who came eventually from Tibet, but in stages, and they were apparently being pursued by their enemies, and they floated across the Brahmaputra river on tree trunks and plantains.
Plantains, yes.
And then they found shelter on Kamakhya, the Nilachal hill, with the Hasis who were then there, and they were the worshippers of Kameikha.
Right.
So basically that is the myth or legend that is associated. But of course, it is impossible to actually establish it by any material or written material, for example, wouldn't exist because they were oral cultures.
Yeah. Okay. And this brings us to the question of Arunachal Pradesh, which did not see any separatist insurgency like seeking us freedom from the rest of the country. But the book also says how fear of Chinese incursions has helped make good Indians of the people there. So can you please tell us a little bit about this?
If you travel around Northeast India, then Arunachal is striking because it is the only place where Hindi is spoken throughout. Everybody speaks in Hindi. It is, of course, a very unique kind of Hindi, but it is Hindi.
Yes.
And so there is no, we've had separatist insurgencies in pretty much all the other states, but Arunachal has not really had a homegrown separatist insurgency seeking freedom from India, which is unlike, say, even a state relatively peaceful such as Meghalaya, where we had Garo and Khasi insurgencies, the HMLC, the GNLA, etc., seeking separation from India itself. That is something which has not happened in the case of Arunachal. There have been other groups which have found shelter in Arunachal. But there is no Arunachali movement for separation from India, quite the contrary. And it is their location between India and China which, in a sense, forces them to choose one or the other.
Okay. But why do you think that did not happen in Arunachal?
It was the process of integration of Arunachal into into British India. I mean, it actually happened very late in the day, and into India as well, which happened after partition. So some stories, for example, are very well known or famous, such as the story about Major Bob Khatting going and planting the flag in Tawa. So those things happened after partition and independence, pretty late in the day. So the integration of those areas and the extension of administration happened pretty late in the day. The manner in which it happened, which to some extent was guided by Dr. Verrier L. the anthropologist, the Shillong-based anthropologist. It may have also been perhaps, it helped perhaps to cause less dislocation in a certain sense. I'm guessing, I'm sort of thinking about what it could be, but those might be factors. That the manner of its integration, the lateness of it, and what it brought to the people there. All of these things, perhaps in combination, helped to create a sense of, what shall I say, of India not as something to be fought against.
Right. Okay. To be part of, so-called modern India. Okay. All right. So this brings us to, the final question, where, your book explores two ideas of India that remain in daily competition, which is Bharat, the Hindu nationalist conception of the country, and Hindustan, which is the Persian origin name by which India is still known. So can you tell us a little more about this?
It's Bharat, Hindustan, and India. It's three. India, it's three. It's not two, it's three. And of course, our constitution itself has two of these names. It mentions Bharat, that is India, or India, that is Bharat. So it starts from there. Those concepts have been in competition and remain in competition. Now, it's almost a daily debate about each of these. So I've tried to look at the origins a little bit, and so the Persian origin of Hindustan, and look back also at how these concepts relate to different territories, different territorial the different spaces. And I guess if you look at the history of administration, the way administration it flows down to what we have now, then it's the British.
Okay.
It's what we have now. Then before that, it's the British. Then before that, it's the Mughals. We inherited a certain structure and system of administration from the British, which was the idea of Hindustan.
Okay.
A certain space, and it was an administration which extended over the territory of Hindustan.
Okay.
There is an idea of Bharat which is much older, but each time you look at each of these concepts, the geographical space you're talking about actually changes. For example, when even colloquially people speak about Hindustan, the idea of Hindustan then would not include. It would include a lot of what is now in Pakistan, but it would not include, for example, Bengal. Because Bengal has a distinct identity. It would not include Assam. Assam has a distinct identity.
Right.
It would not include most of South India below the Vindhyas.
Yes.
So each of these territories has a different spatial connotation.
Right. Okay. All right. Thank you so much, Samrat, for joining us today. And to our viewers, thank you so much for tuning into The Print. I hope you read the book and, and learn so much about Northeast as I did. Thank you so much.
Thanks, Matrilineal.
Thank you.